Hey, we are digging into the Spanish American War really quick. Big thing with this is that I tend to not, and I do this with a lot of wars. I don't really fight the war through lecture. I don't really do a military blow by blow kind of thing. We'll talk about a couple of pieces here and there, but that's not really my thing. I tend to look at conflicts and how they impact the rest of society. Um, the war itself's pretty interesting. I kind of like military history, but to me, this part is more important. So, so in terms of the Spanish American War, big thing here that we're looking at is that this is an 1898 Cuban attempt to break away from Spain. Cuba has been a colony of Spain for a couple of centuries at this point, and more former colonies had been gaining their independence from the mother countries back in Europe. And so 1898, Cuba is going to push for their own independence. It's a little bit later than most of the other countries have done so, but they're getting there. Um, the reason that the United States gets involved is to a degree through something called the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine was issued about 100 years before by President James Monroe, and the idea there is that the United States asserts itself as the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere. So, this side of the globe, we are claiming that we are the dominant force. That's a little early. uh, Back in the early 1800s, the United States does not have the oomph to be doing such things, to be claiming such things. Um, but I'm guessing we should think of this as more of a goal than a reality at the time that it's issued. And it will become a reality, but when President Monroe issues the Monroe Doctrine, there's no way that the United States can actually pull this off. Um, but that mindset is going to stick with the United States, nevertheless. And so in 1898, when Cuba attempts to break away from Spain, President McKinley is the president at the time. He is going to chime in on this. But McKinley is not going to be sort of a war hawk. We'll talk about those in a little while. He's not going to be overly militarily aggressive. McKinley's kind of more of a middle of the road type guy, which is probably a safe position to take and a smart position to take. Uh, doesn't always get what you want, but you try to avoid conflict. And McKinley is going to push for, hey, let's have a negotiated kind of settlement here. Maybe Cuba doesn't get full independence. Maybe Cuba gets more home rule and is still a colony of Spain. And that way we avoid an open war. Cuba and Spain anyway. That's the road that we're trying to go down. But civilians like to get in the way sometimes. One of those civilians is a guy named Julio Sanguili. And Sanguili, like it says up there, is a United States citizen. And Sanguili is, he's originally from Cuba. He moved to the United States for a period of time. He becomes a United States citizen, which is at the time is like 3 to 5 years, depending. And then he goes back to Cuba. So yeah, he's an American citizen, but he's really more of a Cuban guy. and identifies more with the island of Cuba. Well, he goes back to Cuba and gets involved with this revolutionary movement to break away from Spain, and he gets arrested by the Spanish authorities. He's broken the law. It's against the law to be treasonous towards Spain, and so he gets arrested, and the Spanish authorities sentence him to life in prison. Well, the American public simply hears an American citizen went abroad, they got in trouble, and they're sentenced to a lifetime in prison. That's unacceptable. We have this weird sense, and I think other countries do as well, but Americans definitely have this weird sense that we can go abroad and do whatever we want and not expect to face consequences. There's all kinds of stories about, and they don't represent all of us, but there's all kinds of stories of Americans going abroad and breaking the law and then getting in trouble. And the American public's like, oh my gosh, no, you shouldn't have done that. So, Sanguili, this U.S. citizen, is sentenced to life in prison. Well, the American public is going to be outraged about this and demand that the United States get involved. That how dare Spain think that they can do whatever they wish to American citizens, no matter what the guy did. So the United States government, the President McKinley, the McKinley administration, is going to send a warship to Havana Harbor. They're going to send the USS Maine. The United States still does this today. If you hear about, a lot of times the United States will send a carrier group and park them off the coast of North Korea. North Korea likes to get in all kinds of hijinks. And so the United States sends a carrier group to off the coast of North Korea. It's just, pressure. Hey, I need you to calm down. I'm going to punch you. And that's what the United States is doing with Cuba here with the Spanish authorities. The USS Maine goes to Havana. They park in Havana Harbor for a month and nothing happens. And that's what you really want to happen. You want to do power projection, and the subject of your projection settles down a little. Well, at the end of the month, though, the USS Maine explodes out there in Havana Harbor. And immediately, knee-jerk reaction here in the United States is, oh my gosh, it had to be the Spanish. They blew it up. It's all their fault. They killed American sailors. We've got to go and avenge the lives that were lost. William Randolph Hearst owns a lot of newspapers. And one, he wants to sell a lot of newspapers, but two, he wants to assert American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. And so Hearst is going to promote the idea without any evidence yet, because we haven't had time to investigate, but he's going to promote this idea that the Spanish blew up the Maine and get everybody riled up that, hey, Spain is sentencing Americans to life in prison, and here they are blowing up warships. We need to do something. That this kind of aggression can't stand, man. And so that gets promoted, and the United States is going to declare war on Spain. Now, big thing. We don't make time. There we go. That's a better way to say this. We don't make time to do a thorough investigation of this right now. War is declared, and American forces are going to be brought to bear. But in 1912, so 14 years after the fact, 1912, the United States Navy does a thorough investigation. Everybody has calmed way down. It's been enough time that we can look at this a little bit more objectively. the Navy, United States Navy, does an investigation and determines that the Maine exploded due to a boiler explosion. This was completely an accident. In 1974, Hyman Rickover, the Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the modern U.S. Navy, he also went back and studied this again and examined all of the evidence and stuff. And Rickover determined that, yeah, this was just a boiler explosion. Boilers are finicky, they are dangerous, and holy cow, if you don't baby them, they will explode sometimes. And Rickover concluded that, yeah, it was a boiler explosion. The explosion came from inside the ship and blew outward. There's lots of evidence on the photography and stuff at the time. And yeah, this was not the Spanish, setting a mine or hitting this with some kind of torpedo or something. It was an internal explosion. It was an accident. So, but nevertheless, the United States declares war on Spain. And a big thing is that this is the big kind of the social aspects of this war. Uh, the pro-war side in Congress is going to really, really center on masculinity for this war. And these are the Hawks. The Hawks are the pro-war faction of Congress. They tend to seek out military solutions to problems. Teddy Roosevelt, there in the picture with John Muir, is going to be a really, really big advocate for an aggressive response towards Spain. The big reason for this is Roosevelt and a lot of other hawks are going to argue that the war would be good for Americans. We've talked about this in a previous lecture. We, as American society, are transitioning towards factory life, and we're moving away from most people being involved in farming. Well, I'm sitting here at a table and I'm grinding pieces of metal all day on a grinder. It's tiring and you get worn out, but it's not anywhere near as labor intensive as farming. Going out and breaking ground and removing tree stumps and all kinds of stuff like that. So we're not living a rugged life. And so in the United States in the 1890s, late 1890s, we are having a crisis in masculinity. And we're having a crisis in masculinity today in 2025. There's all kinds of talking heads in the media freaking out about the young men of the United States today are not being manly men, and we're playing video games in the basement. I am currently in the basement. I played D&D last night in the basement. Woo! Yeah, we're not, we're having this crisis of masculinity. We have one in 1898. We have several more in the 1900s, and we're having one today. We freak out about American men are not being masculine enough. And so Roosevelt and a lot of the hawks see that, hey, war's good for masculinity. Let's go and get involved in a war. And so that's part of why they're pushing this crisis in masculinity. Also, we need to think about image, race, and gender as well for the Cuban women. The pro-war hawks are going to throw out some interesting ideas. They're going to argue that the Cuban women are supposed good women. One of the lines that comes out during this time is that there's not even a women's club in Havana. What the heck do you mean by that? Well, in the United States, a lot of the women's clubs are women's rights clubs, and they're pushing for women's suffrage. and they're pushing for a greater sense of equality for women. Women should be able to go to all of the places that men go. Women should be able to get outside of the house and find employment if they wish. Um, we shouldn't limit women to sort of traditional women's roles if that's not what they want to do. If they want to do that, that's cool, but women should have the option, right? Well, the thing in Cuba though that we're being presented with here in the United States is, hey, the women down there know their place, kind of a thing, right? So the women in Cuba don't have a women's club. They're not advocating for suffrage. They're not advocating for being involved in politics. These are traditional women. And we're we're in the middle of that too, right? The whole trad wife thing that's on TikTok and YouTube and stuff. So again, the stuff circles. um, anyway, also the Cuban men. The Cuban men are nearly white, manly men. We're playing a lot with race here. And the Cuban men are fighting for independence. They are pushing the Spanish boot heel off of their necks and trying to become an independent country, just like the United States. That's awesome, and we should help them. And that's cool. We should help people to gain their independence. I'm not disagreeing with that, but the whole they're nearly white kind of a thing is weird and problematic. Anyway, now the Doves, the anti-war faction in Congress, are going to employ this ideas of masculinity too. They're going to play with gender issues and stuff, and so they're not completely innocent and kind of dabbling in this, hey, you're being girlish and stuff like that. But the Doves are going to go at it a different way. Since the Hawks are being aggressive and assertive and physically strong and going out and wanting to punch people in the face, the Doves, and these are debates in Congress, you guys. This is not just me pontificating. You can dig into this, into the sources, and they're actually making these arguments. And this is not even me or other historians like, oh, look at this little phrase. No, they're calling this stuff out pretty obviously. But the Doves are going to argue that they are actually being the more masculine people here. They are being the more manly men because they're controlling their emotions. They're going to argue that the Hawks are being unreasonable, they're being hysterical, they're being emotional. And we have that weird connotation, right? That women are more emotional than men, uh, and all that kind of stuff. Well, they're arguing that the Hawks are actually behaving like women because they're allowing their emotions to run away with them and they're getting all upset. And you need to pause and figure out what's going on. The Maine is a little suspicious, maybe. Let's not rush into things and get all super heated. Um, so this idea of masculinity is going to play a lot in this debate over going to war with Spain. President McKinley, he is not, really a hawk. He's trying to be pragmatic here. He's like, hey, let's take a step, let's take a breath. Let's see what's going on with Cuba and Spain, and maybe we can kind of do the amicable separation or get Cuba more independence, but not full independence. His masculinity is questioned. And if you don't believe me about the weird assertions that these people are throwing each other, Teddy Roosevelt lobs one of the weirdest political insults that I've ever heard. Teddy Roosevelt says that McKinley, President of the United States, McKinley, has the backbone of a chocolate eclair. That's some weirdness there, right? But he's saying that McKinley does not have a stiff backbone, a stiff spine, and instead he must have the gooey, squishy, uh, delicious backbone of chocolate eclair. Um, and so they're very much getting into some weird insults, and we do the same thing today. If you pull out some of the strange political discussions and stuff today, we have some weird things like this. So since the trajectory, especially after the Maine, we're very likely going to war. The Doves, sorry, the Doves are going to insert the Teller Amendment into a war resolution. We don't really care about the particulars of what this war resolution was, but this is put in there to test the resolve of the Hawks. Do you guys really want to go to war? And why do you want to go to war? Um, for the last probably 60 to 70 years, the United States has wanted to get Cuba as a state or a territory. There's been efforts to try to annex Cuba for the last 70 or so years. And so the Doves kind of think you guys are using this as an excuse. You're just going to take this as a territory. And so they include the Teller Amendment. Teller Amendment says that the United States is not going to claim Cuba as a territory. We recognize the independence of Cuba. And they put it into this spending bill, and to test if the Hawks would vote for this or not. And the Hawks do support it. They vote yes on it with zero opposition. But remember, it just says we're not going to claim Cuba, and I think the Doves made a little bit of a misstep there, maybe. So anyway, um, Teller Amendment passes. The United States is going to go to war with Cuba. The war is very, very short. It only lasts 16 weeks. And one of the first things that is done, the United States is going to send a naval fleet to the Philippines. Philippines are not even close to Cuba, but this does make sense. The Spanish fleet at the time is located in the Philippines, and we're at war with Spain. You want to destroy their navy because the navy has artillery. They can fire on Cuba when American forces land there. Navy can also bring reinforcements to Cuba, and so they need to be eliminated. So the U.S. Navy steams to the Philippines, engages the Spanish fleet, and really, really big deal. Over the last 35 years, 33 years, the United States has transitioned fully to steel ships. We do not have a wooden navy anymore. Most of the rest of the world's navies, the developed world anyway, has also transitioned to steel ships. Spain is still relying on wooden warships. I personally don't think that, oh, Spain's stupid, look what they did. It's probably because it's really, really expensive to fully transition your Navy like that into a new technology. It's also, from the Spanish point of view, the people that they are going to war with, engaging militarily with, are colonies, and the colonies don't have navies. And so a wooden navy is still vastly superior to what the colonies have. And so I think that Spain just doesn't see this as a necessary financial investment at the time. Um, I haven't really dug into Spanish logic on this, but giving them the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to say that that's probably what they're thinking. Don't know. Somebody look into it. Let me know, or I will remember to look into it at some point. But anyway, the United States Navy is a steel fleet. They're going up against a wooden Navy, they decimate them. They completely destroy the Spanish fleet. Uh, the United States only has one casualty. It's kind of sort of interesting there. Uh, the turrets, the in the where the cannons are housed, the artillery are housed, those steel turrets get really hot. This is the Philippines, and it gets even hotter there. And one American sailor got heat stroke. I think they recovered. It's been a long time since I've looked into this engagement, but yeah, one American sailor gets heat stroke during this engagement, and then that's it for destroying the entire Spanish fleet that's out there. Um, on to Cuba. After dealing with the Spanish fleet, the U.S. forces land and capture Guantanamo Bay. The United States still has control of Guantanamo Bay today, and they fully control the island within a month. Most of the casualties on the American side, and very much on the Spanish side as well, I'm sure, are from disease. This is the last time this happens. Um, we get better with medical technology in preventing deaths. We also get better at killing people. And so every war up to now that the United States has been involved in, most of the casualties come from disease. Um, a lot of casualties come from, enemy fire, but at this point, this is the last time that happens. Moving forward, we get better at killing people, and we get better at preventing deaths from disease and bleeding out and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting turning point right here. Um, the Spanish are going to surrender pretty quickly. And, again, this is a very quick war. And we said we were going to recognize the independence of Cuba, but it's still under occupation right now. But as the Spanish forces start pulling out of the Philippines, American forces start taking control of the islands. And the Filipino people who had been revolting against the Spanish for their own independence are now just seeing that this is a new occupying force. And so they start revolting against the Americans for their independence. And so this this war, it's not really a civil war, this war for independence by the Filipino people is going to be a very bloody affair. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 250,000 Filipino people are killed trying to gain their independence from the United States. This war is going to go on for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. I can't remember. But the United States is not going to allow the Philippines to gain their independence. They don't until 1946. And the United States is going to really get into some messy situations trying to maintain that and kill a lot of Filipino people. Now, after the Spanish are going to withdraw from Cuba, we start changing the way we're looking at Cuba, and we start kind of thinking that maybe we're not really ready to just turn Cuba loose. And so we start seeing the changing imagery of the people of Cuba. The Cuban women were virtuous, and they were traditional women and stuff like that. Well, maybe not so much. The Cuban women are seen as not so virtuous. A big scandal that hits the shores of the United States is, oh my gosh, the Cuban women, a lot of them smoke cigars. Smoking cigarettes is very much a social faux pas in the United States for women, but these women are smoking cigars. Holy cow. Definitely kind of a wild thing. Um, Also, something else that's going to come up here in a little while is that both in Cuba and in the Philippines, these people have experienced kind of societal collapse. This war is going on, and social things, going to work, being able to have a job, being able to secure food, all of that stuff has collapsed. And so, both in the Philippines and in Cuba, a lot of women are going to resort to survival sex. They're going to resort to prostitution, but they're doing that to try to survive. They're trying to feed themselves, they're trying to feed their kids. But here in the United States, the only thing we hear is that, oh my gosh, those women in Cuba and in the Philippines very quickly just resorted to prostitution. They're selling their bodies. There must be terrible, terrible, immoral people. And so that gets a lot of traction in the press. Um, the Cuban men are seen as not so brave. They've resorted to cowardly guerrilla warfare. Well, they're a smaller military force engaging with a much more powerful military force that is Spain. Uh, they're they're doing what they can. They're hitting the Spanish forces in ambush attacks and then melting back into the forests, into the mountains. That's what the Americans did a lot during the American Revolution. But we're calling them cowardly here because American forces are marching into the face of the enemy in this brave kind of heroic fashion. And we forget that, 100 years earlier, American forces were doing the same thing against the British. So, um, with all of this in light, though, and the instability of this new Cuban government, the United States government was very unstable in the first couple of decades. But with this instability of the Cuban government, the United States Congress is going to pass something called the Platt Amendment. That, yep, Cuba's independent, but we have the right to militarily involve ourselves in order to maintain independence and a stable government. And the United States is going to send military expeditions to Cuba for the next several decades. Uh, the United States will be heavily, heavily involved with Cuba. So, not as much of an independent kind of line that is going to cause some problems in the future. Um, Something else, and sorry, my head is covering up the other image there. Something else that's going to change. We have the changing imagery of the Cuban people, both men and women. Also, on the United States side, we are going to see a lot of changes in our imaginations of what this war looked like. Um, we've heard of Teddy Roosevelt forming the Rough Riders and going to Cuba with their horses. Also involved in the war in Cuba were Buffalo Soldiers. African American regiments were deployed to Cuba. And really, really cool, we see the imagery change in art. And Teddy Roosevelt is very, very much in support of this changing of the story here. The first painting up there at the top is by, you don't have to remember anybody that painted these pictures or the dates, but do get the changing imagery though. But that first picture up at the top was painted by Frederic Remington. Remington actually went to Cuba with the American forces. He's an artist. He went to Cuba, and his goal was to sketch and capture, the events of the war. And Remington painted that shortly after he gets back from Cuba, and it's the charge up San Juan Hill. And kind of cool. Remington was there and he is painting this accurately. There's not a whole heck of a lot of horses. There wasn't enough room to take all of these horses for Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. And so Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders were converted to infantry. They were not on horseback charging around Cuba. Also, in that top image, there are a couple of African American soldiers. During the charge up San Juan Hill, everybody starts out in their regiments. The United States military is segregated. There are African American regiments and there are white regiments. Well, during the charge up San Juan Hill, everybody got mixed up because it's a bad idea to run in a straight line if people are shooting at you. You kind of move back and forth. Well, everyone's doing that and everyone gets mixed up. And so there are African American guys fighting alongside white guys, fighting alongside Hispanic guys. And the whole crowd is just kind of mixed up, charging up San Juan Hill, fighting alongside each other. And Remington captures that. Most of the people in that image are white dudes, but there are some Buffalo soldiers mixed in there. Well, about 20 years later, the 1920s, Teddy Roosevelt even kind of changes. When they first get back, Roosevelt's like, yeah, everybody fought bravely. The Buffalo soldiers fought, bravely. They ran up San Juan Hill alongside everybody else. But later, Teddy Roosevelt starts to change his story. And he's like, we kind of ran up fast, and the Buffalo soldiers drifted behind a little bit. They weren't quite as fast as us super quick running white dudes. And so in that second image that comes out about 20 years after Remington's, you don't see any Buffalo soldiers anymore. They're not there. Also, not as important, but we've included a bunch of horses that weren't there. Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders are charging up San Juan Hill on horseback. But the bigger thing is the African American Buffalo soldiers are gone. But my head is covering up the image. But if you want to look it up, that bottom picture there is Mort Cussler, Kunsler, I think. Mort Cussler, he just passed away, I think earlier this year in 2005, and the early spring. But in 1985, historians and Cussler, I would consider him a historian. He did a tremendous amount of research for a lot of his paintings, tried to be as fairly accurate as he possibly could to capture what was happening, but the emotions of what was happening. Cussler removes the horses because Teddy Roosevelt didn't have the horses. The Rough Riders were on foot. And he also, you can't see it because my goofy head's in the way, but he also includes several Buffalo soldiers in that image because the Buffalo soldiers were there. They fought alongside everybody else during the charge up San Juan Hill. And so, both Roosevelt and artists, you see this change, to remove the African American soldiers, include horses, and then again, put back the African American soldiers and then take away the horses. So even in art, we kind of argue about this kind of stuff. It's kind of neat. Another thing that we are going to argue about at the time is recognition. The American Red Cross deployed to Cuba, and their efforts saved a lot of lives. Their efforts to, combat disease and to treat battlefield wounds saved a lot of American lives. And the head of the Red Cross at the time is a lady named Clara Barton. Cool. Well, the United States Congress wants to recognize the Red Cross for their efforts in saving the lives of American servicemen down in Cuba. They're not going to call up the entire Red Cross. That seems a logistical nightmare. And so you call up the head of such organization. And Congress proposes getting Clara Barton to come to Congress, and they are going to recognize her with some kind of honorific to note that, the Red Cross as a whole saved a lot of lives. But there's a problem. There's a problem in recognizing Clara Barton and the Red Cross. Traditionally, when somebody is summoned to Congress to receive some sort of recognition, you go to Congress, they give you a plaque or something like that, and then you get to make a speech. Hey, I couldn't have done this on my own. All of the other members of the Red Cross were down there, and it was their work that really saved all these people. I saved 3. That kind of a thing. Okay. Well, that would, in this situation, entail a woman addressing the members of Congress. And the members of Congress are not interested in that. They're not interested in having a woman come into Congress and tell them what she thinks about anything. And so there's literally, I'm not joking with you, there's literally a debate. Should we allow Clara Barton to come to Congress? The Red Cross, in fact, did a wonderful thing, but if we do that, tradition dictates that we let her talk, and we don't want to hear what a woman has to say about anything, really. And so there's literally a debate over recognizing Clara Barton or not, because woman talking in Congress, we don't want to hear that, right? And so they eventually reach a conclusion that they will recognize Clara Barton. They will summon her to Congress. She will be able to go out onto the congressional floor. I'm guessing that they do this in the House of Representatives. It's a lot bigger than the Senate, on the condition that she not talk. She's allowed to come out there. She gets her award, and then we're shooing her out of the room. No speeches from the lady. And that's what they do. And she, I'm supposing, bites her tongue out of a tremendous amount of frustration for the stupidity of all of this. But she's receiving this award on the behalf of the Red Cross, not just herself. And so she does this, but again, she does not speak, and that's the big kicker there. So, a few things. Cuba is granted its independence in a treaty with Spain. They actually do get their independence. The United States still controls Guantanamo Bay. Also in that treaty, the United States is going to get the Philippines. Philippines will get their independence in 1946. Guam, the United States still controls Guam as a territory, as well as Puerto Rico. The United States still is in control of Puerto Rico as a territory. The people that live there are United States citizens. They do not get to vote in presidential elections if they're there. If some Puerto Rican people move to Alabama, they can vote in presidential elections, but you can't vote in a presidential election in Puerto Rico. There's currently debate. It's a long debate over the status of Puerto Rico. There's been a little bit of, independence grumbling here and there over the years. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But, Puerto Rico becoming a state over the last probably 20, 25 years has been a point of contention. And occasionally they will have a referendum on the island, and usually they've been voting to stay as a territory. There's benefits and drawbacks to each, but usually they've been voting to stay as a territory. The last vote, I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the Puerto Rican people voted to become a state. And that puts the ball in Congress. Congress has not moved on this for, political reasons. But, someday Puerto Rico may become a state. I don't think it would be anytime soon. We will have to settle down as far as the political divisions go before that happens. But I don't know, maybe at some point. Um, couple of last things. Uh, in a lot of these places, especially in the Philippines, less so, not as, it's still a degree, but less so in Puerto Rico, a little bit less so in Guam. The people that inhabit these, the native people that inhabit these places, are regarded as savages by the United States, the public, and the government. And we will really, really work to not allow them any kind of degree of independence. Like we said, the Philippines, there's an was a very, very long war to keep control of the Philippines that goes on for 15, 20 years, resulting in the deaths of a lot of Filipino people. And they'll finally get their independence in 46. The last thing on there, don't really worry about that so much, but one of the excuses that we use to keep control of the Philippines, and Guam especially, is that these islands are going to serve as coaling stations to reach Asian markets. We are industrializing in the United States. Merchant fleets run on coal. We need to have gas stations, in the Pacific, especially. So, uh, let's just skip that, and we'll skip that too because we've already talked about that. So, that's it for this one. We will see you next time.